Picture this: a quiet road, a heartless act, and an unexpected hero. Keanu Reeves, known for his on-screen heroics, found himself in a real-life drama that would touch the hearts of millions. As he drove down a deserted street, he witnessed a shocking scene: a helpless dog being callously tossed from a moving car. In that moment, the line between actor and activist blurred, and Keanu's compassionate nature took center stage. What followed was a week-long journey of healing, not just for the injured pup, but for Keanu's soul as well, as he nursed the dog back to health, a bond formed that would drive him to seek justice in the most unexpected way. This tale of canine rescue and human redemption will leave you wondering, how far would you go to right a wrong? Join us as we unravel this emotional story of love, loyalty, and the unbreakable spirit of both man and his four-legged friend. Before we continue the story, grab your popcorn and get comfy. Let us know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you love stories like this, don't forget to subscribe. We have another amazing story lined up for you tomorrow. On a crisp autumn morning, Keanu Reeves stepped out of his modest Los Angeles home, ready for what he thought would be just another day. The sun was barely peeking over the horizon, casting a warm glow on the quiet streets. Keanu, known for his down-to-earth nature, decided to take a leisurely walk before heading to his latest film set. Little did he know that this simple decision would set in motion a series of events that would change his life and the life of another soul forever. As he strolled down the tree-lined avenue, Keanu's mind wandered to his upcoming scenes. He was deep in thought, mentally rehearsing his lines and considering the emotional depth he wanted to bring to his character. The gentle rustle of leaves beneath his feet and the distant chirping of birds provided a soothing backdrop to his contemplations. Keanu had always been an early riser, finding solace in the tranquility of dawn. This morning ritual allowed him to center himself before diving into the chaotic world of Hollywood. He breathed in the crisp air, feeling grateful for these moments of peace. His path took him through a local park, where he often found inspiration for his roles and a connection to the simpler things in life. As he walked, Keanu reflected on his journey as an actor and the impact he hoped to make through his work. He believed in the power of storytelling to touch hearts and change perspectives. Little did he know that today, he would become part of a real-life story more compelling than any script he had ever read. The neighborhood was just beginning to wake up. A few joggers nodded respectfully as they passed, recognizing the actor but allowing him his privacy. Keanu appreciated this about his community: the ability to blend in and be treated like any other resident. It was this normalcy that he cherished, a stark contrast to the glitz and glamour of Hollywood premieres and red carpets. As he rounded a corner, Keanu's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a car engine revving aggressively. The peaceful morning air was suddenly shattered by the harsh noise, causing him to look up from his reverie. What he saw next would forever be etched in his memory, transforming his ordinary day into something extraordinary. The serenity of the morning was abruptly shattered as Keanu's eyes locked onto a scene that seemed almost surreal in its cruelty. A sleek, black car had screeched to a halt at the side of the road, its engine still running aggressively. The passenger door flew open with such force that it seemed ready to tear off its hinges. What happened next unfolded in a matter of seconds, but for Keanu, it felt like an eternity. A man, his face contorted with rage, emerged from the vehicle. In his arms was a small, struggling bundle, a dog, whimpering and clearly terrified. Without a moment's hesitation, the man violently threw the helpless animal onto the sidewalk. The sickening thud as the dog hit the concrete echoed in the quiet street, a sound that would haunt Keanu for days to come. Time seemed to stand still as Keanu processed the horrific act he had just witnessed. The man, oblivious to Keanu's presence, spat out a string of obscenities at the trembling creature before slamming the car door shut. The tires screeched as the vehicle sped away, leaving behind a cloud of exhaust and an injured, frightened dog. Keanu stood frozen for a split second, his mind reeling from the shock of what he had just seen. The contrast between the peaceful morning he had been enjoying and this act of senseless cruelty was jarring. It was as if two different worlds had collided, the world of everyday kindness and the world of inexplicable brutality. As the reality of the situation sank in, a surge of emotions washed over Keanu. Anger, disbelief, and a profound sense of injustice battled within him. How could someone be so heartless? What kind of person would harm an innocent animal in such a callous manner? These questions raced through his mind as he struggled to comprehend the cruelty he had just witnessed. But beneath the anger and shock, another emotion began to surface: determination. Keanu had always been known for his compassionate nature, both on and off screen. He had supported numerous animal welfare causes over the years, believing deeply in the importance of protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Now, faced with a real-life situation that demanded immediate action, Keanu felt a sense of purpose crystallize within him. The actor's instincts kicked in, not those honed on movie sets, but the innate human instinct to help a creature in distress. Without a second thought, Keanu rushed towards the injured dog, his heart pounding with a mix of adrenaline and concern. As he approached, he could see the animal trembling, its eyes wide with fear and pain. Keanu's mind raced, trying to recall everything he knew about handling injured animals. He knew he had to be cautious. A frightened and hurt dog might lash out in self-defense. Slowly, he crouched down, making himself appear as non-threatening as possible. He began to speak in soft, soothing tones, hoping to calm the terrified creature. "Hey there, little one," Keanu murmured, his voice gentle and reassuring. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you. You're safe now." As he inched closer, Keanu could see the extent of the dog's injuries. There were visible scrapes and bruises from the impact with the sidewalk, and the way the dog held its body suggested there might be more severe internal injuries. The sight only strengthened Keanu's resolve to help. Carefully, he extended his hand, allowing the dog to catch his scent. He remained still, patient, knowing that trust would be crucial in this situation. Slowly, ever so slowly, the dog's trembling began to subside. Its eyes, still wary, seemed to hold a glimmer of hope as it gazed up at Keanu. In that moment, as man and dog locked eyes, a connection was formed. It was as if the animal sensed Keanu's genuine desire to help, his inherent kindness shining through. The dog let out a small whimper, not of fear this time, but of relief, as if it knew it had found a friend in this moment of dire need. Keanu's heart swelled with a mix of sadness and determination. He made a silent promise to the injured creature. He would do everything in his power to right this wrong, to ensure that this dog would never suffer such cruelty again. Little did he know that this promise would lead him on a journey of compassion, justice, and unexpected emotional bonds. As Keanu knelt beside the injured dog, he was struck by the depth of emotion in its eyes. Despite the pain and fear it must have been experiencing, there was an undeniable spark of life, a silent plea for help that touched Keanu to his very core. The dog's gaze seemed to convey a complex mix of emotions: fear, yes, but also a glimmer of hope, as if it recognized in Keanu a potential savior. The actor found himself caught in a moment of profound connection with this small, wounded creature. He had always felt a special affinity for animals, but this was different. This wasn't about admiring a pet from afar or supporting animal welfare causes. This was immediate, raw, and deeply personal. The dog's silent plea resonated within him, awakening a protective instinct he didn't know he possessed. The dog didn't flinch away. Instead, it seemed to lean slightly towards him, as if drawn by the warmth and kindness in Keanu's voice. This small movement, however, caused the dog to whimper in pain, a sound that cut through Keanu like a knife. He realized that time was of the essence. The dog needed medical attention, and fast. Keanu's mind raced, considering his options. He needed to get the dog to a veterinarian, but he was wary of causing more pain by moving it. He also knew that he couldn't leave the animal alone while he went for help. What if the cruel owner came back? Or what if the dog, in its pain and confusion, wandered into the street? As these thoughts tumbled through his mind, Keanu noticed something that made his heart ache even more. Despite its injuries and the trauma it had just endured, the dog was trying to wag its tail. It was a feeble attempt, more of a twitch really, but the meaning was clear. Even in its darkest moment, This brave little creature was trying to be friendly, to connect with the kind human who had come to its aid. This small gesture of trust and resilience strengthened Keanu's resolve. He knew what he had to do. With infinite care, he began to remove his jacket, planning to use it as a makeshift stretcher to carry the dog. As he did so, he continued to talk to the animal, his voice a constant reassuring presence. "You're so brave, little one. I know you're in pain, but I promise I'm going to take care of you. We're going to get through this together." As Keanu prepared to lift the dog, he was struck by how light and fragile it felt. This wasn't a large, robust dog, but a small, vulnerable creature that had been callously discarded like trash. The injustice of it all fueled Keanu's determination. He vowed silently that he would not only help this dog heal, but would also find a way to bring its abuser to justice. Carefully cradling the injured animal in his jacket, Keanu stood up. The dog let out a small whimper but didn't struggle, seeming to understand that Keanu was trying to help. As he held the warm, trembling body close to his chest, Keanu felt a surge of protectiveness wash over him. In that moment, he made a promise, not just to the dog, but to himself. "I've got you now," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You're safe. I won't let anyone hurt you ever again." With these words, Keanu began to walk quickly but carefully towards his home. He knew there was a veterinary clinic nearby, and his mind was already formulating a plan. He would get the dog the medical attention it needed, and then he would figure out the rest. One thing was certain. His ordinary day had turned into an extraordinary mission of compassion and justice. As he walked, Keanu couldn't help but reflect on the strange twists of fate that had brought him to this moment. If he hadn't decided to take that early morning walk, if he hadn't been in exactly the right place at the right time, what would have happened to this innocent creature? The thought sent a shiver down his spine. The weight of the injured dog in his arms felt like a responsibility, but also like a privilege. Keanu had always believed in the importance of kindness and compassion, but now he was living those values in a very real and immediate way. He knew that the road ahead might be challenging, nursing the dog back to health, finding out who was responsible for this cruelty, ensuring justice was served. But he was ready to face those challenges. Its eyes were closed now, but its breathing seemed steady. There was something about its small, battered body that spoke of resilience, of a will to survive despite the cruelty it had faced. Keanu felt a wave of admiration for this brave little soul. "We're almost there," he murmured, as much to reassure himself as the dog. "Just hold on a little longer. Everything's going to be all right." The ordinary day had indeed turned extraordinary, setting in motion a series of events that would challenge him, inspire him, and ultimately remind him of the profound impact that one act of kindness can have in the world. Reaching his vehicle, Keanu faced another dilemma. He needed to open the car door while still holding the dog securely. With some maneuvering, he managed to open the rear door without disturbing his precious cargo. Gently, he lowered the blanket-wrapped dog onto the back seat. He had already decided against putting the animal in the trunk space, wanting to keep a close eye on it during the drive. As he arranged the blanket to create a makeshift nest, Keanu's mind was already racing ahead, planning the next steps. He knew he needed to get the dog to a veterinarian as quickly as possible, but he also wanted to ensure the ride was as smooth and stress-free as possible for the injured animal. With this in mind, he took a moment to clear any loose items from the back seat, creating a safe, stable space for his new charge. Before closing the door, Keanu took one last look at the dog. Its eyes, though clouded with pain, seemed to hold a glimmer of hope. It was as if the animal understood that its fortune had changed, that it was now in caring hands. "We're going to make this right," Keanu promised, his voice thick with emotion. "You're going to be okay." With that, he closed the door gently and moved to the driver's seat. As he started the engine, Keanu's determination solidified. This wasn't just about rescuing a dog. It was about standing up against cruelty and indifference. It was about making a difference, one life at a time. As Keanu eased his car onto the road, he was acutely aware of his precious passenger in the back seat. Every bump, every turn was navigated with extreme care, his usually swift driving style replaced by a cautious approach that prioritized the comfort of the injured dog. His mind raced as he drove, weighing his options. The nearest veterinary clinic was about 15 minutes away, but Keanu knew that in situations like these, every minute counted. He decided to call ahead, wanting to ensure they were prepared for an emergency case. At a red light, Keanu quickly dialed the number of the veterinary clinic. His voice, usually calm and collected, carried an urgency that conveyed the gravity of the situation. "I'm bringing in an injured dog," he explained rapidly to the receptionist. "It's been thrown from a moving vehicle. I'm about 10 minutes out. Please, be ready." The receptionist, recognizing the seriousness of the situation, assured him they would be prepared. Keanu's relief was palpable. He knew that prompt medical attention could make all the difference for the dog's recovery. As he continued to drive, Keanu found himself talking to the dog, his voice a soothing presence in the car. He shared stories of his own experiences with animals, of the dogs he had known and loved. It was as much to comfort the injured animal as it was to calm his own nerves. "You know, I had a dog once named Arch," Keanu said softly, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror to check on his passenger. "He was the most loyal companion you could ask for. Always there, always understanding. That's the thing about dogs, you see. They have this incredible capacity for love and forgiveness." The dog in the back seat whimpered softly, as if in response. Keanu's heart clenched at the sound. He wanted nothing more than to take away the animal's pain, to undo the cruelty it had endured. "We're almost there, buddy," he reassured, his voice thick with emotion. "Just hang on a little longer." As they neared the veterinary clinic, Keanu's mind turned to the future. What would happen to this dog after its injuries were treated? He couldn't bear the thought of it ending up in a shelter, or worse, back on the streets. In that moment, without fully realizing it, Keanu made a decision that would change both his life and the life of the injured animal. "You're coming home with me," he said firmly, his eyes meeting the dog's in the rearview mirror. "We're in this together now." Finally, the veterinary clinic came into view. Keanu pulled into the parking lot, relief washing over him as he saw a team already waiting outside. As he carefully lifted the blanket-wrapped dog from the back seat, he felt a surge of protectiveness. This wasn't just a random act of kindness anymore. It was the beginning of a bond, a commitment to see this through to the end. As he carried the dog towards the waiting veterinary team, Keanu's resolve strengthened. He would do whatever it took to nurse this dog back to health, and then he would ensure that justice was served. The person responsible for this act of cruelty would face the consequences of their actions. But for now, his focus was entirely on the trembling bundle in his arms. As he handed the dog over to the capable hands of the veterinarian, Keanu felt a mix of hope and anxiety. The journey to safety was complete, but the road to recovery was just beginning. "You're safe now," Keanu whispered to the dog as it was gently taken from his arms. "I'll be right here waiting for you." As the veterinary team rushed the injured animal inside, Keanu stood in the parking lot, his heart heavy with concern but buoyed by determination. This was more than just a rescue. It was the start of a mission to heal, to protect, and ultimately, to right a terrible wrong. With a deep breath, Keanu followed the team inside. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he was ready to face them. For now, all that mattered was the well-being of the brave little dog that had found its way into his care and, unknowingly, into his heart. But he knew that these were the experts who could provide the necessary medical attention. Keanu watched anxiously as they carried the dog into the examination room, his eyes never leaving the swinging doors that separated him from his newfound companion. The next few hours were a blur of activity and tension. Keanu paced the waiting room, his mind racing with questions and concerns. Would the dog survive? How severe were its injuries? What kind of life would it have after this ordeal? The weight of responsibility settled heavily on his shoulders, a burden he willingly accepted. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the lead veterinarian emerged from the examination room. Keanu's heart skipped a beat as he searched the doctor's face for any sign of good news. To his relief, the vet offered a reassuring smile. "The dog is stable," the vet explained, her voice calm and professional. "He suffered some bruising and a few minor fractures, but thankfully, there's no internal bleeding or life-threatening injuries. With proper care and rest, he should make a full recovery. Keanu felt a wave of relief wash over him, his tense muscles finally relaxing. But his respite was short-lived as the vet continued. However, the recovery process will be lengthy and demanding. Are you prepared to take on that responsibility? Without hesitation, Keanu nodded firmly. Absolutely, he replied, his voice filled with determination. I'll do whatever it takes to help this dog heal and find happiness again. The vet smiled, impressed by Keanu's commitment. She then proceeded to outline the immediate care plan for the dog. It included pain management, antibiotics to prevent infection, and careful monitoring of his vital signs. Keanu listened intently, absorbing every detail and asking questions to ensure he understood the gravity of the situation and the care required. As the vet finished explaining the medical procedures, Keanu felt a mix of emotions: relief that the dog would survive, anger at the person who had caused this suffering, and a deep sense of responsibility for the creature's well-being. He knew that the journey ahead would be challenging, but he was ready to face it head-on. With the immediate medical crisis addressed, Keanu prepared himself for the next phase of the dog's recovery. He gathered the necessary supplies, including medication, special food, and comfort items to create a safe and nurturing environment for his new companion. As he left the clinic with the dog securely nestled in a comfortable carrier, Keanu felt a renewed sense of purpose. He was no longer just an actor or a celebrity. He was now a caregiver, protector, and friend to this vulnerable creature. The days that followed were a testament to Keanu's unwavering commitment to the injured dog's recovery. He transformed a corner of his home into a cozy, makeshift recovery room, complete with a soft bed, warm blankets, and easy access to water and food. Keanu's focus shifted entirely to providing round-the-clock care for his new companion. Every morning began with a gentle checkup, where Keanu would carefully examine the dog's injuries, looking for any signs of improvement or complications. He diligently followed the vet's instructions, administering medications at precise intervals and changing bandages with the utmost care. The actor's hands, usually seen wielding prop weapons in action movies, now moved with a tender touch, soothing the dog's pain and offering comfort. Keanu's dedication extended far beyond just physical care. He spent hours sitting beside the dog, talking to him in soft, reassuring tones. He read books aloud, shared stories of his own life, and even played gentle music, believing that the positive energy would aid in the healing process. The dog, initially wary and frightened, began to respond to Keanu's voice, his tail wagging slightly at the sound of approaching footsteps. Feeding time became a ritual of patience and encouragement. Keanu prepared special meals as prescribed by the vet, often hand-feeding the dog when it was too weak to eat on its own. He celebrated every small victory, each morsel of food accepted, each small movement made. As a step towards recovery, sleep became a luxury for Keanu as he kept vigilant watch over his charge. Many nights were spent on a makeshift bed next to the dog, ready to offer comfort at the slightest whimper or sign of distress. Dark circles formed under his eyes, but they did nothing to dim the determination that shone within them. As days turned into weeks, Keanu's life revolved entirely around the dog's care. He postponed work commitments, rearranged his schedule, and politely declined social invitations. His friends and colleagues, while surprised at first, soon came to admire his selfless dedication. Some even offered to help, bringing supplies or simply providing moral support during this challenging time. Keanu's journey of caregiving was not without its difficulties. There were moments of frustration when progress seemed slow, and times of fear when the dog's condition momentarily worsened. But through it all, Keanu remained steadfast. He sought advice from veterinarians, researched canine recovery techniques, and even connected with animal rehabilitation experts to ensure he was providing the best possible care. One particularly challenging night, the dog experienced a setback, seeming to be in more pain than usual. Keanu stayed up all night, gently massaging the dog's limbs, speaking words of encouragement, and carefully monitoring his temperature and breathing. As dawn broke, the dog's discomfort eased, and Keanu felt a renewed sense of hope. This experience only strengthened his resolve to see the recovery through to the end. The actor's compassion extended beyond just physical care. Recognizing the emotional trauma the dog had endured, Keanu worked tirelessly to rebuild the animal's trust in humans. He moved slowly around the dog, always speaking in soothing tones, and allowed the dog to initiate contact when it felt comfortable. This patience paid off as the dog gradually began to seek out Keanu's touch, finding comfort in his presence. Keanu's dedication did not go unnoticed by the veterinary staff who regularly checked on the dog's progress. They were impressed by his attention to detail, his willingness to learn, and his unwavering commitment. One vet remarked, "In all my years of practice, I've rarely seen someone so dedicated to an animal's recovery. Keanu's care is making a real difference." As weeks turned into a month, the demanding care routine became second nature to Keanu. He found a new rhythm to his life, one that revolved around the needs of his canine companion. The exhaustion and sacrifices seemed small in comparison to the joy he felt watching the dog grow stronger each day. In caring for this injured creature, Keanu discovered a depth of compassion within himself that he hadn't fully realized before. As the days passed, small but significant signs of improvement began to emerge in the dog's condition. These changes, while subtle at first, were like beacons of hope for Keanu, reinforcing his belief in the power of care and perseverance. The first notable improvement came in the dog's appetite. What started as a struggle to consume even the smallest amounts of food gradually evolved into eager anticipation of meal times. Keanu's heart swelled with joy the first time he saw the dog's tail wag at the sight of his food bowl. This renewed interest in eating was not just a sign of physical recovery, but also indicated a growing will to live and thrive. Mobility was the next hurdle to overcome. In the beginning, the dog could barely move without whimpering in pain. Keanu, under the guidance of the vet, began a gentle physical therapy routine. He started with simple exercises, carefully moving the dog's legs to prevent muscle atrophy. As days turned into weeks, these sessions became more involved. Keanu would encourage the dog to take a few steps, supporting its weight and praising every effort. The breakthrough came on a sunny afternoon, about 3 weeks into the recovery process. Keanu was sitting on the floor, gently coaxing the dog to walk towards him, when suddenly, the animal took several unassisted steps. The moment was electric. Keanu's eyes welled up with tears of joy, and the dog, seeming to sense the significance of the moment, gave a small, triumphant bark. This milestone marked a turning point in the recovery journey. From that day forward, progress seemed to accelerate. The dog began to move around more, exploring its surroundings with growing confidence. Keanu created safe spaces throughout the house, allowing the dog to roam and rebuild its strength naturally. He watched with pride as his furry friend navigated small obstacles, each day venturing a little further than the last. The physical wounds began to heal visibly. Bruises faded, cuts closed, and fur started to grow back over scarred areas. Keanu diligently applied the prescribed ointments and changed bandages, noting with satisfaction how the dog's body was mending itself. The vet's checkups became occasions for celebration as each visit confirmed the steady progress. Perhaps the most heartening aspect of the recovery was the change in the dog's demeanor. The fear and wariness that had initially clouded its eyes began to dissipate, replaced by a growing spark of curiosity and joy. The dog started to respond more enthusiastically to Keanu's voice, even attempting to play at times. These moments of playfulness, though brief at first, were precious indicators of the animal's improving mental state. Sleep patterns improved dramatically as well. Gone were the restless nights filled with whimpers of pain. Instead, the dog began to sleep peacefully, often curled up close to Keanu. This deep, healing sleep was crucial for the recovery process, allowing the dog's body to focus its energy on repair and regeneration. As the recovery progressed, Keanu introduced more elements of a normal dog's life. He brought in soft toys, carefully chosen to be safe for the still healing animal. The first time the dog picked up a toy in its mouth and brought it to Keanu was a moment of pure joy. It was a clear sign that the dog was not just recovering physically but was beginning to embrace life again. Outdoor experiences were gradually reintroduced. Initially, this meant simply sitting in the backyard, allowing the dog to feel the grass under its paws and breathe in the fresh air. As strength returned, these outings extended to short, gentle walks. Keanu was ever vigilant, watching for signs of fatigue or discomfort, always ready to carry the dog home if needed. The dog's senses seemed to reawaken during this period of recovery. Keanu noticed how his companion would perk up at the sound of birds or the scent of flowers. These small reactions to the world around them were powerful reminders of the resilience of life and the dog's growing engagement with its environment. Throughout this journey of recovery, there were setbacks, days when progress seemed to halt or even reverse. During these times, Keanu's patience and positivity were crucial. He learned to celebrate even the smallest victories and to maintain hope during challenging periods. His unwavering belief in the dog's ability to heal seemed to transmit itself to the animal, providing a constant source of encouragement. As weeks turned into months, the transformation became undeniable. The once broken creature that Keanu had rescued from the roadside was evolving into a vibrant, energetic dog. Scars remained, both physical and emotional, but they were overshadowed by the new lease on life that shone through in every wagging tail and playful bark. The vet, on a recent checkup, marveled at the progress. "This recovery is nothing short of miraculous," she said, her voice filled with admiration. "It's a testament to both the dog's resilience and your extraordinary care, Keanu." For Keanu, watching this gradual recovery was a profoundly moving experience. It reinforced his belief in the power of compassion and the incredible strength of the bond between humans and animals. As he looked at the now thriving dog, he felt a sense of accomplishment, unlike any he had experienced in his career. This journey of healing had not only transformed the dog, but had also left an indelible mark on Keanu's own heart. As the dog's physical recovery progressed, something equally profound was taking place: the formation of an unbreakable bond between Keanu and his canine companion. This connection, forged through countless hours of care, shared struggles, and small triumphs, grew into a relationship that would change both of their lives forever. The foundation of this bond was laid in those early days of intense care. Keanu's gentle touch, soothing voice, and constant presence became a source of comfort and security for the traumatized dog. As the animal began to associate Keanu with safety and relief from pain, a tentative trust started to form. This trust was the seedling from which their deep connection would grow. As the dog's strength returned, so did its personality. Keanu watched with delight as quirks and traits began to emerge. He discovered that his new friend had a particular fondness for classical music, often tilting its head in curiosity when Keanu played Bach or Mozart. This shared appreciation for music became a special part of their routine, with Keanu often humming tunes as they relaxed together. Communication between them evolved in subtle, yet meaningful ways. Keanu learned to read the dog's body language, understanding when it needed comfort, play, or simply some quiet companionship. In turn, the dog became attuned to Keanu's moods, offering a comforting paw or a playful nudge when it sensed he was stressed or tired. This nonverbal dialogue deepened their connection, creating a mutual understanding that transcended words. Their bond was strengthened through shared experiences and routines. Morning walks, once a careful exercise in rebuilding strength, became joyous explorations. Keanu delighted in watching his companion's growing curiosity about the world. The way it would pause to sniff a flower or playfully chase a butterfly. These simple moments of shared joy cemented their relationship. As the dog's playfulness returned, so did a new dimension to their bond. Keanu found himself laughing more than he had in years, engaged in silly games of tug-of-war or fetch. The pure, uncomplicated happiness that radiated from the dog during these play sessions was infectious, reminding Keanu of the simple pleasures in life. The emotional healing of the dog became intertwined with Keanu's own emotional journey, as he helped his companion overcome fear and trauma. Keanu found himself confronting and healing some of his own emotional scars. The unconditional love and trust the dog offered became a powerful force in Keanu's life, helping him navigate his own challenges with renewed strength and perspective. Their connection deepened through moments of vulnerability. On nights when the dog had nightmares, likely reliving its traumatic experience, Keanu was there to provide comfort and reassurance. Similarly, on days when Keanu felt overwhelmed by the pressures of his career or personal life, The simple act of sitting quietly with his loyal companion brought a sense of peace and grounding. As time passed, it became clear that their bond was not just one of caregiver and patient, but of true companionship. The dog's presence in Keanu's life filled a void he hadn't even realized existed. The unconditional love and loyalty he received were matched only by his own devotion to his furry friend. This deep connection began to influence other aspects of Keanu's life. He found himself making decisions with the dog's well-being in mind, from choosing film projects that wouldn't require long periods away from home to redesigning parts of his house to be more dog-friendly. The needs and happiness of his companion became seamlessly integrated into his life plans. The transformation in both Keanu and the dog was noticed by everyone around them. Friends and colleagues remarked on the newfound lightness in Keanu's demeanor, the way his eyes lit up when he spoke about his dog. Veterinarians and animal behaviorists were amazed at the dog's recovery, not just physically but emotionally, attributing much of it to the strong bond it had formed with Keanu. As the months passed, their relationship continued to evolve and deepen. They developed their own language of sorts, a look, a gesture, a particular bark that conveyed volumes between them. Keanu found himself talking to the dog about his day, sharing thoughts and feelings he rarely expressed to anyone else. In those moments, he felt truly heard and understood. The impact of this bond extended beyond their personal relationship. Keanu became more involved in animal welfare causes, using his platform to advocate for rescue animals and responsible pet ownership. His experience had opened his eyes to the profound impact that the human-animal bond can have, and he felt compelled to share this message with the world. In quiet moments, Keanu often reflected on the serendipity of their meeting. What had started as a chance encounter on a roadside had blossomed into one of the most significant relationships of his life. He marveled at how this creature, once broken and discarded, had brought such richness and meaning to his existence. As they sat together on the porch one evening, watching the sunset, with the dog on the mend, Keanu Reeves found himself unable to shake off the lingering sense of injustice. The image of the innocent creature being callously tossed from a moving vehicle haunted him, fueling a determination to right this wrong. Keanu knew that true healing for both the dog and his own conscience would only come through seeking justice for the heinous act. Keanu's first step was to retrace his steps to the scene of the incident. He revisited the stretch of road where he had first encountered the injured dog, hoping to find any clues that might lead him to the perpetrator. As he scanned the area, his keen eye caught sight of something glinting in the afternoon sun. A small piece of metal that appeared to have fallen from a vehicle. Upon closer inspection, Keanu realized it was a custom license plate frame, likely dislodged during the abrupt stop when the dog was thrown out. The frame bore the name of a local auto shop, providing Keanu with his first solid lead. With renewed vigor, he set out to follow this thread, determined to unravel the mystery and bring the culprit to justice. Keanu's next move was to visit the auto shop mentioned on the license plate frame. Approaching the counter, he craftily engaged the mechanic in conversation, weaving a story about how he was looking for a friend who had recently had work done at their shop. He described the vehicle he had glimpsed on that fateful day, careful not to arouse suspicion. The mechanic, unsuspecting and eager to help, checked their records and provided Keanu with a list of recent customers who matched the description. Armed with this information, Keanu felt a surge of hope. He was one step closer to identifying the person responsible for the dog's suffering. As night fell, Keanu found himself poring over the list of names and addresses, cross-referencing them with public records and social media profiles. His celebrity status granted him access to resources that might have been out of reach for the average person, and he leveraged every connection he had to gather more information. Hours turned into days as Keanu pursued every lead, no matter how small. He interviewed neighbors, checked security camera footage from nearby businesses, and even enlisted the help of a private investigator friend to dig deeper into the backgrounds of potential suspects. Throughout this process, Keanu's resolve never wavered. The memory of the dog's pain-filled eyes and whimpers of agony fueled his determination. He knew that somewhere out there, the person responsible for this cruelty was going about their life, unaware that justice was closing in on them. After days of relentless investigation, Keanu's efforts finally bore fruit. He had narrowed down his list of suspects to a single individual, a man named Frank Davenport, whose address matched one on the list provided by the auto shop. Keanu's heart raced as he drove to the address, a modest house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. As he approached, he noticed a vehicle in the driveway that matched the description of the one he had seen on that fateful day. The custom license plate frame from the auto shop was clearly visible, confirming Keanu's suspicions. Parking his car a short distance away, Keanu observed the house, watching for any signs of activity. He needed to be certain that this was indeed the right place before making his move. As he waited, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. From the moment he found the injured dog to the painstaking investigation that followed. As dusk settled over the neighborhood, Keanu saw a man matching Frank Davenport's description return home. The man's demeanor was casual, showing no signs of the guilt or remorse that should have plagued someone who had committed such a cruel act. This only served to strengthen Keanu's resolve. With the abuser's residence now confirmed, Keanu knew he had to proceed cautiously. He couldn't risk alerting Davenport to his presence or intentions. Keanu decided to conduct further surveillance, observing Davenport's routines and habits to determine the best time to confront him. Over the next few days, Keanu meticulously documented Davenport's comings and goings. He noticed that Davenport lived alone and typically left for work early in the morning, returning in the evening. On weekends, he often spent time in his garage, working on his car, the very vehicle used in the act of cruelty against the dog. As Keanu watched Davenport go about his daily life, seemingly without a care in the world, he felt a mixture of anger and disbelief. How could someone capable of such callousness towards an innocent animal live so normally? The contrast between Davenport's mundane routines and the pain he had inflicted on the dog only fueled Keanu's determination to bring him to justice. During his surveillance, Keanu also took note of the neighborhood dynamics. He observed the comings and goings of other residents, identified any potential witnesses, and mapped out possible escape routes. This meticulous planning was crucial. Keanu knew that when the time came to confront Davenport, he needed to be prepared for any eventuality. As the days passed, Keanu's resolve only grew stronger. He thought about the dog, now recovering in the safety of his home, and knew that he owed it to the innocent creature to see this through. The weight of responsibility sat heavily on his shoulders, but Keanu embraced it, drawing strength from the knowledge that he was fighting for a voiceless victim. Finally, after a week of careful observation and planning, Keanu felt ready to make his move. He had identified a window of opportunity, a time when Davenport would be home alone, with minimal risk of interruption or witnesses. With a mix of anticipation and trepidation, Keanu prepared himself for the confrontation that lay ahead. As twilight descended on the quiet suburban street, Keanu Reeves steeled himself for the confrontation he had been preparing for. He parked his car a block away and approached Frank Davenport's house on foot, his heart pounding with a mixture of righteous anger and nervous energy. Keanu knocked on the door, his knuckles rapping against the wood with a determination that belied the turmoil within him. Moments later, the door swung open, revealing Frank Davenport, the man Keanu had spent weeks tracking down. "Can I help you?" Davenport asked, his expression a mixture of confusion and annoyance at the unexpected visitor. Keanu's voice was low and controlled as he responded, "Mr. Davenport, we need to talk about what happened on Highway 101 2 weeks ago." The color drained from Davenport's face, his eyes widening in recognition and fear. He attempted to slam the door shut, but Keanu was prepared, wedging his foot in the doorway and pushing his way into the house. "Who are you?" Davenport stammered, backing away as Keanu advanced into the living room. "I'm the person who found the dog you threw out of your car," Keanu replied, his voice thick with emotion. "The dog that you left to die on the side of the road." Davenport's face contorted into a mix of defiance and panic. "I don't know what you're talking about," he sputtered, but the tremor in his voice betrayed his guilt. Keanu's eyes blazed with intensity as he recounted the events of that day, describing in vivid detail the condition of the dog and the suffering it had endured. With each word, Davenport seemed to shrink, the weight of his actions finally catching up to him. "Why?" Keanu demanded, his voice rising. "Why would you do something so cruel to an innocent animal?" Davenport's facade crumbled, and he collapsed onto his couch, burying his face in his hands. I didn't mean to, he choked out. The dog was sick, and I couldn't afford the vet bills. I panicked. I didn't know what else to do. Keanu felt a surge of disgust and pity wash over him. There are always other options, he said, his voice softening slightly. Shelters, rescue organizations, even asking for help online. What you did was not just cruel, it was cowardly. As Davenport sat there, shoulders shaking with silent sobs, Keanu took a moment to look around the room. His eyes fell on a framed photo of a young girl hugging a dog, presumably Davenport's daughter, with the very animal he had discarded so callously. "Is this your daughter?" Keanu asked, picking up the frame. Davenport nodded weakly. "And this was her dog, wasn't it?" Keanu pressed, his voice laden with disappointment and anger. Another nod from Davenport, who couldn't bring himself to meet Keanu's gaze. "What did you tell her?" Keanu asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I told her the dog ran away," Davenport admitted, his voice breaking. "I couldn't bear to tell her the truth." The room fell silent, the weight of Davenport's confession hanging heavily in the air. Keanu took a deep breath, struggling to contain the maelstrom of emotions swirling within him. "Mr. Davenport," Keanu began, his voice steady and resolute, "what you did was inexcusable. That dog trusted you, depended on you. And you betrayed that trust in the worst possible way." Davenport remained silent, his head bowed in shame. "But," Keanu continued, "I didn't come here just to condemn you. I came here to give you a chance to make things right." Davenport looked up, confusion and a glimmer of hope in his tear-stained eyes. "The dog survived," Keanu revealed. "I found him, got him medical treatment, and he's recovering. But he deserves justice, and so does your daughter." Keanu's words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of their implications. Frank Davenport sat frozen, his face a canvas of conflicting emotions: relief that the dog had survived, fear of the consequences he might face, and shame for his actions. What do you want me to do?" Davenport asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Keanu's eyes narrowed, his jaw set with determination. "First, you're going to come with me to see the dog. You need to face the consequences of your actions head-on." Davenport nodded weakly, knowing he had no choice but to comply. As they left the house and got into Keanu's car, an uncomfortable silence settled between them. The short drive to Keanu's temporary residence felt like an eternity for Davenport, each passing moment bringing him closer to confronting the living evidence of his cruelty. Upon arriving, Keanu led Davenport into the house. The moment they stepped inside, they were greeted by the soft whimpers of the recovering dog. Davenport's breath caught in his throat as he laid eyes on the animal he had so callously discarded. The dog, still bearing the visible signs of its ordeal, cowered at the sight of Davenport. Its reaction was a stark reminder of the trauma it had endured. Keanu knelt beside the dog, gently stroking its fur to calm it. "This is what you did," Keanu said, his voice low and intense. "This is the pain and fear you caused." Davenport's legs gave way, and he sank to his knees, overwhelmed by the reality of his actions. Tears streamed down his face as he reached out a trembling hand towards the dog, only to have it shrink away in fear. "I'm so sorry," Davenport sobbed, the weight of his guilt crushing down on him. I didn't think." "No, you didn't think," Keanu interjected sharply. "You didn't think about the pain you were causing, about the life you were throwing away." As Davenport continued to weep, Keanu's expression softened slightly. He knew that true justice wasn't about revenge, but about restoration and preventing future harm. "Mr. Davenport," Keanu began, his tone firm but not unkind, "what you did was horrible, but you have a chance to make amends. Here's what's going to happen." Keanu outlined his plan. Davenport would confess his actions to his daughter, explaining the truth about what happened to her dog. He would then work with local animal shelters, volunteering his time to care for abandoned and abused animals. Additionally, he would make regular donations to animal welfare organizations, ensuring that other animals in need would receive the care his dog should have gotten. But that's not all. Keanu continued, his eyes locked on Davenport's. You're going to experience a fraction of what this dog went through. Davenport looked up, fear evident in his eyes. For the next week, you'll sleep outside in your backyard. No comfortable bed, no shelter beyond what you can make for yourself. You'll eat from a bowl on the ground, and you'll experience the vulnerability and discomfort this dog felt when you abandoned it. Davenport nodded, accepting his punishment without protest. He knew that compared to what he had done, this was a small price to pay. And one more thing, Keanu added, his voice softening. After you've completed this, and if the dog is willing, you'll have the chance to make things right with him, to earn his trust back, and maybe, in time, to reunite him with your daughter. Davenport's eyes widened at this unexpected opportunity for redemption. You'd allow that? He asked, his voice trembling with emotion. Keanu nodded solemnly. This isn't about punishment for punishment's sake. It's about learning, growing, and making amends. If you can prove that you've changed, that you understand the gravity of what you did, then yes, there's a chance for reconciliation. As the reality of Keanu's words sank in, Davenport's demeanor changed. The fear and shame in his eyes were replaced by a glimmer of determination and hope. He looked at the dog, then back at Keanu, and nodded resolutely. I'll do it, he said, his voice steadier than it had been all evening. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Keanu stood up, extending a hand to help Davenport to his feet. Then let's begin, he said. Over the next week, Keanu supervised Davenport's punishment, ensuring he adhered to the agreed-upon conditions. He watched as Davenport struggled with the discomfort and exposure, gaining a new appreciation for the hardships animals face when abandoned. During this time, Keanu also worked with the dog, slowly acclimating it to Davenport's presence. The process was slow and often challenging, but gradually, the dog's fear began to subside. As the week drew to a close, Keanu observed a profound change in Davenport. The man who had so callously thrown away a life was now humbled, his eyes opened to the consequences of his actions. He had confessed to his daughter, faced her tears and anger, and committed himself to making amends. On the final day, Keanu brought the dog to Davenport's yard. With gentle encouragement, the dog cautiously approached Davenport, who remained still, allowing the animal to make the choice. As the dog sniffed his hand and then tentatively licked it, Davenport broke down in tears of remorse and gratitude. Keanu watched the scene unfold, a mix of emotions washing over him. He had set out to seek justice, to right a wrong, and in the process, he had facilitated a transformation. The road ahead would be long, with much work still to be done. But in this moment, he saw the first steps towards healing and redemption. As he prepared to leave, Keanu reflected on the journey that had brought him here. From the moment he found the injured dog on the roadside to this day of tentative reconciliation, he had been driven by a deep sense of compassion and justice. He realized that true heroism wasn't just about grand gestures, but about the everyday choice to stand up for those who cannot stand up for themselves. With a final look at Davenport and the dog, now cautiously bonding in the yard, Keanu turned to leave. He knew that his work here was done, but the impact of his actions would ripple outward, touching not just the lives of this man and this dog, but potentially inspiring others to act with kindness and courage in the face of cruelty. As he walked away, Keanu felt a sense of peace settle over him. He had sought justice, but in the end, he had found something more powerful, the potential for change, for growth, and for compassion to triumph over cruelty. And in that realization, Keanu found the true meaning of his journey. His unwavering commitment to nursing the dog back to health and confronting the perpetrator demonstrates that one person's actions can make a profound difference in the life of another, even if that life belongs to a four-legged friend. As we reflect on this touching story, let it serve as a reminder that we all have the capacity to be heroes in our everyday lives. Whether it's helping an animal in need, standing up against cruelty, or simply showing compassion to those around us, our actions can create ripples of positive change. May Keanu's example inspire us to be more aware of the suffering around us and to take action, no matter how small, to make the world a better place for all living beings. Thank you for watching. If you missed our last story, don't worry, I've got you covered. I'll leave it here for you to watch. Hope you enjoy it. Keanu Reeves was navigating the streets of Los Angeles when something compelled him to hit the brakes. A solitary figure was seated on the sidewalk, enveloped in a worn-out blanket. Initially, it seemed like just another lost soul in the city. But then his heart skipped a beat. He recognized that face. What followed would not only alter his night, but also reveal a painful past he could never overlook. Before we proceed with this tale, let us know where you're tuning in from. And if you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel because tomorrow we have another special story for you. The deep rumble of the Norton Commando 961 pierced the quiet Los Angeles night, resonating through the deserted streets. The city was asleep, its lights flickering softly as the early morning fog began to spread across the asphalt. Keanu Reeves rode his motorcycle with a distant expression, his leather gloves gripping the handlebars tightly, the cold wind brushing against his face. He cherished these hours after long charity events, speeches, and interviews. The bike was his escape. The sound of the engine, the scent of asphalt, the freedom of the road. It allowed him to forget, if only briefly, the burden of fame and expectations. That night's event had been significant. The fundraiser had secured funding for an arts education program in public schools, a cause dear to him. As he shook hands and posed for photos, his mind wandered back to his early days in theater, that insecure kid on stage, trying to find his voice. In that stream of thought, something made him blink and ease the brakes. To his right, a figure was curled up on the sidewalk, leaning against the worn-out wall of a closed commercial building. A woman, just another homeless person on the streets of Los Angeles, a common sight that, no matter how painful, had become part of the city's landscape. But then a chill ran down his spine. He couldn't quite identify what made him slow down. Perhaps it was the way she sat, a posture too still, too withdrawn. Maybe it was the way her frail body clung to the dirty, tattered blanket. Perhaps it was just instinct, or maybe it was something else. He frowned, quickly looking forward again, his heart beginning to race, a quiet unease spreading through his chest. The bike moved forward a few more meters before he decided to stop. He took a deep breath, closing his eyes for a moment. This doesn't make sense, he thought. But what was stopping him from checking? Just to be sure, just to clear the doubt in his mind. With a smooth motion, he turned the bike around, slowing down as he approached the spot where he had seen the woman. His headlight cast a dim glow over her frail frame, a small, fragile silhouette against the cold concrete. He pulled over at the curb and turned off the engine. The silence that followed was piercing. Keanu slowly removed his gloves, his fingers trembling for no apparent reason. Something deep inside him already knew the answer before he even asked the question. He stepped forward, his boots echoing on the damp pavement. The woman shifted slightly, perhaps sensing his presence. His heart pounded against his ribs as he got closer, taking in the details, the worn-out coat, the gray, tangled strands of hair escaping from beneath the hood, the thin, wrinkled hands clutching the filthy blanket as if it were the only thing keeping her tethered to this world. And then his stomach twisted. Even in the dim light, even with the shadows masking the toll of time and hardship, that face was etched into his memory. Time seemed to freeze. Keanu wetted his lips, his throat tightening. When he spoke, his voice was hesitant, almost a whisper. "Mrs. Collins." The woman shuddered at the sound of his voice. Slowly, as if each movement required tremendous effort, she lifted her face toward him, her dull, weary eyes meeting his. Keanu held his breath for a moment, a heavy silence blanketing the air as if time itself had paused between recognition and disbelief. She blinked slowly, her gaze struggling to focus, her expression flickering from confusion to something else. The world around them disappeared. No more empty streets, no more cold night air. Just this moment suspended between the past and the harsh reality of now. Her lips parted, and then her knees buckled, her body pitching forward. Keanu lunged instinctively, his arms moving fast to catch her before she hit the ground. A chill ran down his spine. She was too light, too fragile. His mind raced with questions, but this wasn't the time for answers, because before he could say anything else, her eyes fluttered closed, and in that instant, Keanu knew nothing about this night would end the way it began. Time seemed to slow as Keanu held Mrs. Collins' frail body before she could hit the ground. His heart pounded against his ribs. "Mrs. Collins," he called again. But there was no response. She was conscious but seemed unable to hold herself up, her breathing uneven, her thin shoulders trembling, whether from the cold or exhaustion, he couldn't tell. Keanu glanced around. The streets were empty, only a few distant cars passing by. The faint wail of a siren echoed through the city, blending with the soft hum of the streetlights. He didn't know what to do. Instinctively, he helped her sit up properly, propping her against the wall. "Can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open slowly, unfocused. He noticed the dark circles beneath them, the way her skin was etched with time and suffering. Then she whispered something. "Keanu." His name came out in a breath of disbelief, as if she were trying to confirm whether he was real or just another figment of a fading memory. Keanu nodded, trying to offer a reassuring smile. His chest felt constricted. "It's me, Mrs. Collins. It's really me." The silence between them was intense. He could see her mind working, trying to understand why he was there, standing before her after so many years. As the initial shock began to fade, a deeper emotion flickered in her eyes. Recognition. For a brief moment, Keanu was no longer in the chilly streets of Los Angeles. He was a boy again, standing nervously on a small school stage, clutching a script with sweaty hands. Her voice echoed in his mind. "On stage, you never hide. You feel. You live." Then he was back in the present, looking at the woman who had taught him everything about acting. But now she seemed unrecognizable. Keanu's chest tightened. How had this happened? He swallowed hard and finally broke the silence. "Is it really you?" She took a shaky breath, her voice raspy. "I think so." Her words were fragile, as if they carried the weight of years. Keanu hesitated. There were so many things he wanted to ask, but something told him to tread carefully. "You," he started, but stopped. What could he possibly say? Mrs. Collins tried to shift, but her body wouldn't cooperate. She shivered, and Keanu realized just how weak she was. Without thinking, he took off his leather jacket and draped it over her shoulders. She flinched at the sudden warmth, but didn't resist. Then, in a barely audible voice, she said, "It's been a long time, hasn't it?" Keanu nodded, watching her closely. Yes, it had been a long time. But no number of years could have prepared him to find her like this. She ran a hand over her face as if trying to wake herself from a nightmare, her gaze dropping to the ground. Keanu noticed her hesitation, the shame of not wanting to be seen like this. But he saw her, and before he could stop himself, the question slipped from his lips. "What happened to you?" The silence that followed was sharp, cutting through the night like a blade. Mrs. Collins lowered her head, her thin hands clutching the filthy blanket tighter against her chest. Keanu could feel the weight of the moment. Her story was there, hidden between the words she couldn't say. He waited, and finally, after a long pause, she whispered something that sent a cold wave through him. "I tried, Keanu." Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she looked at him again. "I tried." What did she mean by that? What had she tried? Before Keanu could ask, her body gave out once more. She collapsed forward, and Keanu caught her firmly. This time, he knew he couldn't leave her there. He had to do something. With his mind racing and his heart pounding, Keanu made his decision. But he knew this night was far from over. The silence between them was heavy. Keanu still held Mrs. Collins, making sure she wouldn't collapse again. The weight of her body in his arms felt unreal, like she was only a shadow of the woman he had known years ago. Slowly, he helped her lean back against the cold wall of the building. Her breathing was unsteady, broken by small shivers. He didn't know if it was from the cold night air or sheer exhaustion pulling her down. He hesitated before speaking. "Can you hear me?" She blinked slowly, as if keeping her eyes open was a battle. After a few moments, her gaze found his. "I can." Keanu let out a quiet breath. The truth was, he had no idea what to do. The urgency to help her was overwhelming, but at the same time, he knew he couldn't just pick her up and drag her to a better place. He needed to understand. "What happened to you?" Mrs. Collins immediately looked away. The question lingered between them, unanswered. The silence stretched. Keanu sat beside her, ignoring the cold, dirty pavement. She didn't have to answer right now, but he wasn't going anywhere. He would wait. Mrs. Collins clutched the blanket tighter around herself, as if it was the only thing holding her together. Her breathing had steadied, but her gaze remained distant. After a long pause, she finally spoke, her voice low and rough. "You shouldn't be here." Keanu looked at her calmly. "And you should." She let out a short, humorless laugh. "Nice one, Reeves." He didn't smile. There was something in her eyes, something beyond pain. Shame. She didn't want to be seen like this, but he had already seen her. Mrs. Collins took a deep breath, as if gathering the courage to keep going. "The truth is, I don't know what to say. I didn't want anyone to see me like this, least of all you."
Keanu remained silent.
He knew that sometimes silence was more powerful than any words. She hesitated, her eyes locked on the empty street. Then finally, she began to speak. "I lost my job when the theater program was cut." Keanu had suspected something like that might happen, but hearing it from her made it real. "I tried to keep going, offering private lessons for a while, and taking on small jobs here and there, but everything started to unravel. The bills piled up, and the city consumed me entirely." She paused, her gaze drifting into memories that seemed too painful to relive all at once. "Initially, I thought it was just a rough patch, that I'd find something new and everything would return to normal. But as the months went by, I suddenly found myself without a home." Keanu felt a knot tighten in his throat. He had always known life could be harsh, but he never imagined she had fallen this far. "I spent some time moving from couch to couch, staying with people who still cared, but eventually, doors began to close. People get tired. No one wants a long-term problem in their life." Keanu knew that was true. The world could be unforgiving. Mrs. Collins rubbed her hands together as if trying to shake off a cold that had settled deep inside her. And then, before I realized it, it was too late. Keanu's chest ached as he thought of everything she had meant to him. All the time she had encouraged him and helped him find his voice on stage. And now she was here, alone and broken. He wanted to say something, but before he could, she murmured almost to herself, "The hardest part isn't losing things. It's losing people." She pressed her lips together as if holding something bigger inside. Then her voice dropped lower, trembling. "I pushed everyone away, Keanu, the few who still cared, because the truth is, I didn't want to be a burden." A chill ran through him. He knew that feeling, the sense that you're dragging people down, that it's better to disappear than to become someone else's problem. He knew that shadow, but seeing it in her hurt in a way he wasn't prepared for. Then she said something that made his heartbeat quicken. "And I made a mistake I can't undo." She didn't explain, but Keanu noticed the hesitation in her voice, the weight behind her words. There was something else, something she wasn't ready to say. "Not yet?" The silence stretched between them. Keanu ran a hand through his hair, trying to think. He wanted to ask the right questions, but he knew he couldn't push, so he simply said firmly, "You're not a burden to me." Mrs. Collins closed her eyes, looking away. "You say that now?" Keanu shook his head. "I say that because it's true." She let out a long breath, like she wanted to believe him but couldn't. And then he asked the question he didn't want to ask but knew he had to. "What about your children?" The air between them shifted. Mrs. Collins's body tensed. For a moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. But then she whispered, barely audible, "They tried to help me for a while." The incomplete answer made Keanu's stomach turn. What happened with her children? Why was she here alone? Before he could ask anything else, Mrs. Collins's gaze drifted back to the empty street. She seemed distant, far from this moment, and for the first time that night, Keanu saw something in her eyes that unsettled him. A silent darkness, a pain too deep to put into words, something beyond physical suffering. And he knew her story was far worse than he had imagined, and he hadn't heard all of it yet. Her words hung in the air like a knife suspended, ready to fall. "They tried to help me for a while." Keanu felt the weight of that sentence. Mrs. Collins's tone wasn't just sad. There was something else beneath it, something he didn't yet understand. The silence between them stretched. She kept staring at the empty street as if she were somewhere else, lost in memories he couldn't reach. Keanu wanted to ask more, he wanted to understand, but something in her expression stopped him. He noticed the way her fingers clenched around the filthy blanket, holding on to it as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded in the present. So he just waited. The sharp night wind swept through the street, carrying the distant sound of a car passing on another avenue. Finally, she sighed. They did what they could. They helped when things started to fall apart. She moved her fingers slowly, lost in thought. But after a while, I pushed them away. Keanu frowned. Why? She let out a short, hollow laugh. Because I didn't want to be a burden. He closed his eyes for a moment. That feeling, he knew it well, but still, it didn't make sense. And they just accepted that? Mrs. Collins hesitated before answering. Not right away. They tried. They gave me options, but I refused. She bit her lower lip as if holding something bigger inside. After a while, they stopped insisting. Keanu felt a tightness in his chest. He tried to picture what had happened. He imagined her children's faces he had never seen, reaching out to help her, only to watch her pull away. And then all that remained, silence settled over them again. And that's when he noticed something. When the sleeve of her tattered coat slipped slightly, he saw it. A scar, thin and pale, stretching along her forearm. A knot formed in his stomach. She realized he had seen it, but she didn't move to cover it. She just looked at him, and in that look, there was a warning. Don't ask. Keanu pressed his lips together. He wanted to ask. He wanted to know what it meant. But part of him already knew the answer, and for now, he wasn't sure she was ready to talk about it. So instead, he simply said, his voice steady, I'm here now. Mrs. Collins let out a short laugh. And what difference does that make? Keanu looked directly into her eyes. It signifies that you're no longer alone. She blinked, as if those words were hard to comprehend. Before she could reply, the silence of the night was interrupted by footsteps. Someone was walking along the sidewalk, not far from them. Keanu instinctively turned his head, and Mrs. Collins did the same. A shadow moved under the dim streetlights. A man in loose, dirty clothes, his weary eyes fixed on them. He stopped a few feet away. Hey. His voice was rough. Got a cigarette? Mrs. Collins shook her head. I don't smoke. The man glanced at Keanu, who just stared back, relaxed yet vigilant. The man shrugged and continued walking. Mrs. Collins exhaled slowly. Don't trust anyone around here, she advised, looking at Keanu. You should go. He raised an eyebrow. And leave you here alone? She chuckled softly. I'm not as fragile as I look. Keanu narrowed his eyes. No, but you're not invincible either. She didn't respond. The wind blew again, lifting dust from the sidewalk. Keanu knew this night was far from over, and that Mrs. Collins had much more to share. The night dragged on, and the city of Los Angeles remained cold and indifferent. Keanu had no idea how long he had been sitting there with Mrs. Collins. Maybe minutes, maybe hours. But something inside him told him he couldn't just leave her there. She, on the other hand, seemed convinced otherwise. You should go. Her voice was quiet but firm. Keanu crossed his arms, leaning against the wall beside her. I won't. She let out a tired sigh. Keanu, don't even try to convince me. Her eyes flickered with a mix of exasperation and something else he couldn't quite decipher. Were you always this stubborn? He smirked slightly. I learned from a certain teacher. She lowered her head and let out a short, humorless laugh. The silence between them lingered. Mrs. Collins pulled the blanket tighter around herself, shrinking slightly. Keanu could see how exhausted she was, how the cold in the streets had drained her. But he also saw something deeper. She didn't want help, or rather, she didn't believe she deserved it, and that unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Keanu looked around. The streets were empty, but he knew the city never truly slept. He turned back to her, his voice more serious now. You can't stay here all night. She lifted her eyes to him. And what do you suggest? Keanu hesitated for a moment before answering. Let's go somewhere else. She raised an eyebrow, as if the idea was absurd. And where would we go? He thought quickly. A hotel? No. She would refuse. His house? She would never accept. Then an idea surfaced, a 24-hour cafe. She blinked, caught off guard. What? Keanu shrugged. Nothing fancy, just a warm place. Coffee, food. You can rest for a bit. She opened her mouth to refuse, but Keanu spoke first. Just 1 hour, then you decide what to do. Mrs. Collins pressed her lips together. He could see the battle happening inside her. Accepting meant admitting she needed help, but refusing meant spending the night on that cold piece of concrete. Finally, she sighed. 1 hour. Keanu let out a small smile. Deal. The bell on the cafe door jingled as they stepped inside. The place was simple, with a few scattered customers at worn-out tables. Keanu led Mrs. Collins to a quiet corner. She walked slowly, as if every step took effort. Once they sat down, a waiter approached. What can I get you? Keanu looked at Mrs. Collins, waiting for her to order, but she hesitated. He noticed she wasn't used to choosing, so he did it for her. 2 coffees and whatever's the warmest, most filling thing on the menu. The waiter nodded and walked away. Mrs. Collins looked at him. Have you always had this instinct to save people? Keanu shrugged. I just do what feels right. She sighed, running a hand through her hair, still messy despite being clean. Sometimes people don't want to be saved. Keanu held her gaze for a moment. Sometimes they just think they can't be. Silence settled between them again. When the coffee arrived, Mrs. Collins wrapped both hands around the cup as if absorbing its warmth. She closed her eyes as she took the first sip. Keanu watched her. She looked so small in that moment. So much had been taken from her, but at the same time, he saw something different. A spark, faint but still there. Then suddenly, she broke the silence. You want to ask about the scar, don't you? The question caught Keanu off guard. He looked at her for a moment. He thought about lying, saying no, but he was always a terrible liar. I do. She lowered her eyes to the table. It took a few moments before she spoke. I was at my lowest point, Keanu. Worse than now. He held his breath. She traced the rim of her cup with her fingers. I didn't see a way out. I didn't think it was worth trying. A chill ran down Keanu's spine. She didn't need to say more. He understood. Mrs. Collins took a deep breath. But I'm here, still, somehow. Keanu watched her for a long time, then simply said, I'm glad you are. She lifted her eyes to him, surprised, and for a brief moment, Keanu saw something new in her expression. Something that wasn't there before. Hope. Mrs. Collins looked down at her coffee, lost in thought. Then she murmured, Why are you doing this, Keanu? He didn't answer right away. He just held her gaze, and mentioned that it was because you did it for me. Initially, silence enveloped them, but this time it was a different kind of quiet, a silence brimming with potential. The first step had been taken, yet the journey ahead remained lengthy. Mrs. Collins held the warm coffee in her hands, not drinking it, as if the warmth could somehow tether her to reality. Keanu observed quietly, aware that this night marked a turning point not only for her, but for him as well. She had finally spoken about the pain, the scar, and the burden of the choices that had brought her here. But now came the most challenging part, accepting genuine help. Mrs. Collins sighed, placing the cup on the table. Keanu straightened his posture. Now, let me help, he said. She let out a soft, weary laugh. And how exactly do you plan to do that? Keanu met her gaze. By taking you somewhere you can start anew. She shook her head. It's not that simple. Why not? She opened her mouth to reply but hesitated. For the first time, she seemed uncertain about refusing. Keanu noticed and realized he was close to breaking the invisible barrier she had erected around herself. He took a deep breath before continuing. I found you by chance tonight, but now that I have, I won't just walk away. She looked away. I don't want to be your responsibility, Keanu. It's not about responsibility, he leaned forward slightly. It's about choice. She blinked, puzzled. Choice. Yes, you chose to help so many students in the past. You chose to believe in me when I doubted myself. Now it's my turn to believe in you. She swallowed hard. The truth was, no one had spoken to her like this in a long time. And what if I fail? Her voice was barely a whisper. Keanu gave her a small, knowing smile. And what if you don't? Mrs. Collins fell silent. That was it. The question she had never allowed herself to ask. She had spent her life believing she was already lost. But now, for the first time in a long time, someone was asking, what if you weren't? Slowly, as if testing the words, she murmured, what do you have in mind? Keanu didn't hide his smile. A support center for homeless women. They offer recovery programs, therapy, housing assistance, and job referrals. She frowned slightly. And you think I belong there? Keanu raised an eyebrow. I think you deserve a second chance. Mrs. Collins remained silent for a long moment, the internal struggle visible. But then she slowly nodded. It was barely a movement, but Keanu saw it. Okay, she said. Those words, so simple, meant far more than they seemed. They were the beginning of something new. Keanu drove through the still sleeping city, this time not on his motorcycle. He had managed to get a car so she could be more comfortable. She sat quietly in the passenger seat, watching the streets pass by through the window, lost in thought. By the time they arrived at the center, the sun was beginning to rise. It was a simple, unassuming building, but with a welcoming atmosphere. Women moved about, some carrying bags, others speaking in hushed voices. Keanu turned off the engine and looked at her. Ready? She let out a slow breath. I don't know. That's okay, he smiled. We do this at your pace. She looked at the entrance, then back at Keanu, and finally, she opened the car door and stepped out. Mrs. Collins walked slowly toward the entrance, her fingers hovering over the door handle, hesitating. Keanu stood beside her. One step at a time, he said. She closed her eyes for a moment, and then finally, she stepped inside. Keanu smiled. The transformation had begun. The support center carried the faint scent of coffee and freshly baked bread. The walls were lined with framed messages of encouragement, and the space felt warmer than Mrs. Collins had expected. But the discomfort was still there. She felt every glance that landed on her, every voice murmuring in the background. A part of her wanted to turn around and leave before it was too late. But then she looked to her side. Keanu was there. No rush, no pressure, just waiting. She took a deep breath and took the first step. The community theater was bustling that afternoon. Children ran across the stage, laughing, trying to memorize their lines for the play at the end of the month. Keanu walked among the young actors, helping a boy project his voice, but suddenly he stopped. In the distance, near the side door, he saw her, Mrs. Collins. Not the woman he had found that cold night. Now she was stronger, more alive. Her once unkempt hair was neatly tied in a simple bun, and her clothes were clean and well kept. She looked more herself. Keanu smiled. She caught his gaze and walked over. I think you tricked me, Reeves, she said. He raised an eyebrow. Oh yeah? How so? She crossed her arms, looking at the stage. You told me it was just a support center. You didn't tell me it was also a place where I'd find myself again. He chuckled. Some things you only discover along the way. Mrs. Collins sighed, shaking her head. I never thought I'd work with theater again. Keanu smiled. But it was always in you. She looked at him for a moment, saying nothing. Then a small smile appeared on her lips. She turned to the children on stage. All right, everyone. I want to feel some real emotion in those lines. The young actors' voices grew louder, and the stage came to life once more. Keanu crossed his arms and watched. She was back. Maybe not completely. Maybe there would still be hard days. But for the first time in a long time, she was truly there. Life doesn't always give second chances, but sometimes all we need is someone who believes in us. If you enjoyed this story, we have many more that will warm your heart. Click the screen to explore more stories of hope, compassion, and resilience.